The time was exactly 6:42 in the morning when the sound began. It was not the gentle chirp of the mourning doves or the distant hum of the first commuters on the county road. It was a metallic clang, followed by a low, guttural curse. I was on my back porch, holding a warm mug of coffee, a ritual I had maintained for the 6 years since Martha passed. The steam from the mug fogged the cool morning air, a brief, white ghost against the deep green of my lawn. Through that mist, I saw her. Eleanor Vance, president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association, stood on my property, hands on her hips, directing two beleaguered-looking men who were wrestling with a section of prefabricated aluminum fencing. She was pointing at a pair of ancient live oaks that marked the eastern boundary of my land, a boundary I knew with an intimacy that bordered on the cellular. Between those two oaks ran a shallow, grassy depressionous swale, in my professional parlance, that the neighborhood children, and, more recently, the HOA landscaping crews, had taken to using as a shortcut to the community lake. I had tolerated the foot traffic, mostly out of a desire for peace. But this was something else entirely. They were driving metal posts into my soil. My soil. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was black, no sugar. The bitterness was a familiar anchor. I watched them for another minute as they positioned the gate, its future hinges aligned perfectly to block the swale. Eleanor adjusted the crisp lapel of her blazer, a garment she wore like a suit of armor. Even at this ungodly hour, she saw me then. Her face, which always seemed arranged in a state of perpetual dissatisfaction, tightened into a triumphant smirk. She strode across the dew-laden grass, her sensible heels sinking slightly into the turf. "A good morning, Arthur," she said, her voice carrying an edge of false cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. "Glad to see you are up. We be done here in an hour or so. Just improving the community access point." I remained silent, letting the statement hang in the air between us. I took another sip of coffee. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any argument could. This is HOA common area, as you know," she continued, gesturing vaguely at the land around her. We're formalizing the pathway for resident safety. The board approved it last Tuesday. You were notified. I knew for a fact that my property line extended a full 15 feet beyond those oak trees. I knew the swale was a deeded drainage easement, not a common area. And I knew I had received no such notification, because I checked my mail with the same meticulousness I once used to check structural load calculations. I kept observing. I raised my phone, which had been resting on the table beside me, and began recording. The small red light was barely visible, but she saw it. Her face flushed a dull, angry red. "Are you recording me? That is a violation of privacy. I am an officer of the Homeowners Association, conducting official business. You will be fined for this, and for any interference with this project. This gate is going up. If you so much as touch it, we will have it declared vandalism of HOA property, and the sheriff will be here to escort you away. Do you understand me, Arthur?" She identified herself. She stated her authority. She made her threats. On paper, or in this case on video, she was building my case for me. I lowered the phone and took one last, long sip of coffee, draining the mug. I looked at her, standing there on my land, radiating a confidence born of pure, unadulterated ignorance. I looked at the metal posts, desecrating the root system of a 200-year-old oak tree. I looked at the cheap aluminum gate that was about to obstruct a critical piece of stormwater infrastructure. She had no idea. She had no idea who I was, what I did for 45 years, or what that simple grassy ditch actually represented. She had no idea. She had just declared war on the one man in this entire subdivision who could tell her, down to the cubic foot per second, exactly how much trouble she was in. She had no idea. She just buried the only thing keeping her street dry. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain a few things. To understand why a 68-year-old widower with a bad left knee was feeling a calm, cold sense of clarity while being threatened with legal action, you need to understand the nature of my work, the history of Eleanor Vance, and the sacred importance of a simple manila folder. My name is Arthur Pendleton. For 45 years, I was a licensed professional civil engineer. My specialty was hydrology and land development planning. In simpler terms, I was the man developers and municipalities hired to make sure water went where it was supposed to go. I designed drainage systems, floodplains, and retention ponds. My job was to read the land, to understand its contours and its thirst, and to impose a delicate, calculated order upon it. I dealt in facts, in signed and sealed blueprints, in county plat maps, and in the unyielding truths of physics and property law. I did not deal in suggestions, in feelings, or in what someone wished the rules were. My entire professional life was a battle against chaos, waged with a transit, a calculator, and a deep respect for documented evidence. When I retired, I thought I had left that life behind. I was wrong. My wife, Martha, and I bought this house 20 years ago. It was the last one on the street, bordered by a wooded preserve. The large backyard was what sold her. She was a master gardener, a woman who could coax life from the most stubborn clay. That yard was her canvas. After she was gone, the garden became my sanctuary. 1. Tending her roses, weeding her vegetable pacha, it was my way of continuing a conversation with her. The property wasn't just land. It was a living testament to our life together. It was quiet, it was orderly, and it was mine. On paper, Eleanor Vance had moved in about 10 years ago. She was a whirlwind of manicured energy and misplaced ambition. Within a year, she had staged a coup of sorts and had herself elected president of the HOA board. Her platform was simple: order and property values. But her definition of order was tyranny. She was the kind of person who would measure the height of your grass with a ruler and issue a violation notice if it was a quarter of an inch too tall. She fined Mr. Sow Henderson 300, 'cause his garden gnome was, in her words, aesthetically jarring. As she forced the Miller family to repaint their front door 3 times, because none of the shades of beige they chose were the exact shade of beige approved in a bylaw she herself had written and passed with her hand-picked board members. She ruled through a combination of public shaming at meetings, a blizzard of violation letters, and the implied threat of liens and legal fees. Most people, busy with their lives and jobs, simply paid the ridiculous fines to make her go away. They were afraid of her, they cowered, and with every small victory, her sense of entitlement grew. It metastasized. She began to believe that the HOA bylaws, which she interpreted with the flexibility of a religious zealot, superseded county ordinances and even state law. She believed her will was, in effect, the law of Lakeside Meadows. The shortcut, as it was called, was the perfect example of her creeping imperialism. When we first moved in, old Mr. Gable from next door would occasionally cut across the swale to go fishing in the lake. He always asked. Martha would give him a thermos of iced tea. It was a neighborly arrangement. After he passed, a few other neighbors started using it. I never made a fuss. It was a passive acquiescence, not a granting of rights. But when Eleanor's reign began, the nature of the path changed. First, she directed the HOA landscaping crews to start using it as an access route for their heavy mowers, saving them a 5-minute trip around the block. This caused ruts and erosion. Then, she started referring to it in HOA newsletters as the Eastlake Walkway. She was attempting to create a history, to establish a right of use through rhetoric and repetition. She was trying to take a piece of my property through sheer force of will. I had seen this coming. A man like me, who spent his life defining boundaries, is sensitive to their erosion. About 3 years ago, after the first newsletter mentioning the walkway, I started a file. It was a simple manila folder at first, labeled a Lakeside HOA. The first item I placed in it was a copy of my deed with the property description highlighted. The second was a certified copy of my property survey, from when we bought the house. The third was that newsletter. When the first baseless violation notice arrived, for our unapproved perennial plantings, which were Martha's prize-winning irises, I did not argue. I paid the $50 fine with a personal check. When the canceled check came back, I stapled it to the notice and placed it in the folder. This established a record of compliance and financial transaction. I kept the receipts. When Eleanor sent a threatening email about the ruts from the mowers, claiming they were my responsibility to fix, I saved the email, printed it, and took time-stamp photographs of the landscaping crew driving their Toro groundsmaster across the swale. I added it all to the folder. Over the years, the single folder became a binder. Then it became a series of 3-ring binders, neatly labeled by year. I had copies of every newsletter, every email, every fine. I had photographs. I had quiet, 5-minute video recordings of HOA meetings taken from the back of the room. I had documented Eleanor's pattern of behavior not just towards me, but towards others. I had Mr. Henderson's gnome fine. I had the Miller family's paint receipts. I was not a vigilante. I was simply an engineer. I was collecting data. I believe in documentation. I believe in process. I believe that if you give a bully enough rope, they will eventually fashion a noose, and all you have to do is provide the structural anchor point from which to hang it. That morning, as she drove a metal stake 6 inches from the trunk of Martha's favorite oak tree, Eleanor Vance had just handed me the anchor point. After she and her crew left, having erected the ugly flimsy gate, I went back inside. The confrontation on the porch hadn't shaken me. It had focused me. The quiet, simmering resentment of the past 3 years had cooled into a hard, clear purpose. I walked past the kitchen, past the living room filled with Martha's things, and went into my office. It was the one room in the house that was entirely mine. End quote. The walls were lined with bookshelves groaning under the weight of engineering textbooks, building codes and binders, full of old project files. On my desk sat a powerful computer with dual monitors and a large format plotter I had bought when I retired, unable to completely let go of the tools of my trade. I sat down in my worn leather chair and placed my hands on the cool surface of the desk. I did not immediately start working. I just sat there for a moment, breathing. I was getting to work. It was a feeling I knew well. The quiet hum of a problem space opening up before me. The challenge of assembling disparate pieces of information into a coherent, unassailable whole. This was not a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a project. My final project. Project Code LV01. For a legal victory. My first action was to compose a letter. This was not an angry email. It was a formal professional communication. I addressed it to Eleanor Vance and to each of the 4 other members of the HOA board. By name, I used the official Lakeside Meadows HOA address, as well as their individual home addresses. I drafted it with the sterile precision of a legal document. The letter stated 3 things. 1. That on the morning of the 5th of October, at approximately 6:45 a.m., the HOA, under the direction of its president, had trespassed on my private property, legal description attached as Exhibit A, and installed a structure without my consent. 2. That the area in question was not common property, but a deeded private drainage easement, the purpose of which was strictly for the conveyance of stormwater, not pedestrian or vehicular traffic. Relevant section of my deed, highlighted in Exhibit B. 3. I demanded the immediate removal of the gate and all associated hardware within 7 calendar days, and the restoration of the turf to its original condition. I concluded by stating that if the structure was not removed by the deadline, I would have it removed myself and would bill the HOA for all associated costs. I printed 5 copies of the letter and its exhibits. The exhibits were a certified copy of my deed and a high-resolution print of the official property survey, on which I had clearly marked the location of the gate in red. I didn't include threats. I didn't include emotion. I just stated the facts. On paper. I drove to the post office and sent each of the 5 letters via certified mail, with return receipt requested. This was crucial. It created an undeniable record that they had received and read my warning. The little green signature cards would be my proof. They were more receipts from my collection. Eleanor's response was, in its own way, exactly what I expected. The green cards came back to me within 3 days, all signed. Then, silent. For a week on the 8th day, I received an official-looking envelope from the HOA. It was not an apology. It was a formal notice of violation. It cited me for unauthorized modification of a common area referring to the swale, and levied a fine of $1,000. It further stated that my letter had been reviewed by the board and dismissed as a frivolous and without merit. The final line was pure Eleanor. The board considers this matter closed. She had not just ignored my warning, she had mocked it. She had physically discarded the evidence I presented, and doubled down. This was the moment of escalation I had been waiting for. It was the signal that a simple resolution was impossible. She had chosen the path of conflict. She had no idea how well I could pave that road. I picked up the phone and called Gene. Gene had been my firma's lead paralegal for 30 years. He was retired now, too, but his mind was as sharp as a tack. He lived and breathed property law, zoning ordinances, and the beautiful, intricate bureaucracy of the county clerk's office. "Arthur, you old goat," he grumbled into the phone. "I'm supposed to be fishing. I'm sending you an email. I have a small project for you. Pro bono, of course. Consider it a puzzle." I sent him a neatly compiled PDF containing everything. The video from my phone, the certified mail receipts, the violation notice, and a summary of the situation. I asked him to do a full title search on my property going back to the original subdivision grant, to pull the HOA ACE articles of incorporation, and to get me a copy of every permit filed for the Lakeside Meadows development since its inception. It was a lot to ask, but Gene loved a good paper chase. While Gene was digging into the county archives, I began my own work. I retreated to my office. I pulled out the original subdivision plats for Lakeside Meadows, which I had acquired years ago out of professional curiosity. These were the master blueprints for the entire neighborhood. I smoothed the large sheet out on my drafting table. The crisp blue line showed every lot, every road, every utility easement. And there it was, snaking across the back of my property. A 20-foot wide dashed line labeled a drainage easement. I spent the next 2 days in a state of focused immersion. I cross-referenced the plats with topographical maps from the county GIS database. I pulled historical rainfall data from the National Weather Service. I was building a model. I was doing what I had always done, understanding the system. The swale on my property was not just a ditch. It was the primary overflow channel for a large retention pond at the north end of the neighborhood. In a standard 100-year storm event, that swale was designed to carry thousands of gallons of water per minute, diverting it safely toward the lake and preventing the houses on the lower-lying streets, Eleanor's Street, ironically, from flooding. And then, late on the second night, surrounded by maps and calculations, I found it. It was a note in the margin of the original hydrological study for the development, a document I had to file a special request with the county engineering department to get. The note was written in faded ink next to a complex differential equation. It read, "A channel must remain unpaved and unimpeded to maintain required percolation and flow velocity. Recommend vegetative cover only AP. Arthur Pendleton." A cold shock went through me. I didn't remember writing it. It was from 1984. I was a junior engineer then, a kid just a few years out of college, working for the large firm that designed this very subdivision. I had worked on this project. My own signature was on the approval page of the master drainage plan, right below my old boss's. This changed everything. This was no longer just a property dispute. Obstructing that easement wasn't just trespassing. It was a flagrant violation of the subdivision's foundational engineering, and a public safety hazard. Paving it, as Eleanor had threatened to do, would be monumentally stupid. It would be like putting a cork in a fire hydrant. The liability for the HOA, and for her personally, as the board president who ordered the work, would be catastrophic. This was the bombshell. This was the piece of evidence that transformed the argument from a shouting match into a formal indictment. I kept the receipts, and this one was 40 years old, written in my own hand. A week later, I had the gate removed. I hired a licensed and insured contractor, not a handyman. I wanted a paper trail. They came in a professional truck, documented the state of the gate with photographs, carefully extracted the concrete footings, and filled the holes with topsoil and seed. They provided me with a detailed invoice for $850, which I paid with a credit card. I sent a copy of the invoice, along with a polite cover letter, to the HOA board, requesting reimbursement. The response was swift and apoplectic. Eleanor lost her mind. The very next morning, a Saturday, I was woken not by the birds, but by a furious pounding on my front door. I looked through the peephole. It was Eleanor, her face contorted with rage, and behind her, a county sheriff's deputy. She had called the cops. I had been expecting this. I took a deep breath, walked to my office, and retrieved a single clear plastic sleeve from my desk. It contained 2 documents: my driver's license and a laminated color copy of the official county plat map showing my property. Then, I opened the door. That is him, officer," Eleanor shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. That is Arthur Pendleton. He destroyed HOA property. Hey, been threatening me. He is unstable." The deputy was young, with a calm, watchful expression. His name tag read a Miller. He looked from Eleanor's theatrical performance to my calm demeanor. He was assessing, not reacting. "Sir," he said to me, his voice even. "I am Deputy Miller. We received a call about a property dispute and destruction of property. Can you tell me what is going on? Good morning?" "Deputy," I said quietly. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about a property line. It is not a misunderstanding," Eleanor cut in. It's a common area. He tore down a safety gate we installed. I want him arrested for vandalism. I want to press charges." Deputy Miller held up a hand to silence her, a gesture that clearly annoyed her. He turned back to me. "Mom, let him speak." "Sir?" I did not get into a verbal sparring match. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply handed the plastic sleeve to the deputy. "This is my identification." "Deputy," I said. "And this is the official county plat map for this parcel. The area in question is here. I pointed with my finger to the 20-foot easement clearly delineated within the boundaries of my lot. As you can see, it is part of my private property." Deputy Miller took the sleeve. He looked at my driver's license, then at my face. He then spent a long moment studying the map, He was a professional. He understood what he was looking at. He could see the survey markers noted on the map, and he glanced over my shoulder toward the lawn where the actual metal survey stakes were still visible in the ground, exactly where the map said they should be. Eleanor, seeing she was losing control, tried a different tactic. That map is old, it's fake. We have bylaws. The HOA has maintained that path for years. It belongs to the community. The deputy ignored her. He looked at me. So the gate she was talking about was installed on your property. According to this document, that is correct, deputy, I said. It was installed without my permission. I had it removed by a licensed contractor, after providing the HOA with 7. That's a written notice. I did not offer more information than was necessary. I was only answering his questions. He handed the sleeve back to me. His expression was one of weary resignation. He had seen this movie before. He turned to Eleanor. He said, his tone shifting from inquisitive to official. Based on the documentation provided to me, this appears to be a civil matter regarding a property line dispute. It's not a criminal issue. I cannot arrest a man for removing an object from his own property. But it is our property, she sputtered, her voice cracking. He is lying. Mom. He has provided an official county document, the deputy said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Do you have a survey or a deed that contradicts this? It is in the bylaws. I am the president of the HOA, she insisted, as if the title itself was a legal deed. Your bylaws do not supersede county property records, he said flatly. If you believe this map is incorrect, you will need to hire a surveyor and take it up with your attorneys in civil court. There is nothing the sheriff's department can do here. You are currently standing on what appears to be Mr. Pendleton's property. I would advise you to return to your own feet. On Eleanor's face was a sight to behold, and it was a complete deflation. Her entire arsenal of bluster. Her authority, her threats had been rendered useless by a single laminated piece of paper. Before the deputy left, I made one final crucial move. Deputy Miller, I said, making sure to use his name. For the record, could you include in your report that I presented you with my identification and an official county plat map, and that you advised all parties that this is a civil matter? A flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew I was creating a record. He knew what I was doing. His body camera was recording this entire exchange. Yes, sir, he nodded. It will all be in the report. He gave Eleanor one last warning, tipped his hat to me, and walked back to his patrol car. The body cam footage of that exchange, with the uniformed officer of the law validating my position and dismissing hers on my own front porch, was now a piece of evidence. It was another receipt for the binder. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, her face a mask of incandescent fury. She said nothing. She just stared at me, then turned and stomped back across the lawn. The war had just begun, but I had won the first decisive battle without ever raising my voice. The incident with the sheriff's deputy was a public humiliation for Eleanor, and it had an unintended consequence. It emboldened people. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. For the first time, people saw that her power was not absolute. They saw that a single, well-prepared individual could stand up to her and not be struck down by legal lightning. 2 days later, there was a tentative knock on my door. It was Mr. Henderson, the man she had fined for the garden gnome. He was a retired accountant in his late 70s, a gentle soul who had lived in his house for 40 years. He was holding a worn cardboard box. "Arthur," he said, his voice quiet, "I heard what happened. Well, I thought you might be able to use these." He handed me the box. I invited him in, and we sat at my kitchen table. Inside the box were years of HOA documents. Mr. Henderson, it turned out, had been the board's secretary for a decade, before Eleanor orchestrated his removal. He had kept meticulous records. The box contained copies of meeting minutes, financial statements, and internal correspondence. He had everything. She is a bully. Arthur, he said, his hands trembling slightly as he sipped the tea. I made him she forced me out because I questioned her spending. She would adjourn the official meeting and then hold an executive session with her cronies to pass things without a proper vote. It was all in there. We spent the next 2 hours going through the documents. It was a treasure trove. There were the minutes from a meeting 2 years ago where the HOA's own landscaping contractor had advised the board in writing that using the swale as an access route was causing erosion and could be a liability. Eleanor had dismissed the warning, stating it was not a priority. There were records of her using HOA funds for personal projects, thinly disguised as a community beautification. Mr. Tay, Bister. Henderson had kept copies of the original receipts. He was an accountant. He kept the receipts. He was my kind of people. He was the fearful ally, the keeper of the community's conscience, and he had just handed me the prosecution's case files. The next day, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply a lakeside board. The email was from Sarah Jenkins, the newest member of the board. She was a young accountant who had been elected 6 months prior, promising transparency. The email was brief. Pendleton, I am deeply concerned by the potential legal and financial exposure Mrs. Vance is creating for the association and for us as individual homeowners. I cannot speak publicly, but I want to help. I have attached a document you may find useful. Please keep my involvement confidential. The attachment was a scanned copy of the HOA's liability insurance policy. Sarah, the disillusioned insider, had highlighted a specific exclusion clause. It stated in no uncertain terms that the policy would not cover any damages, claims, or legal costs arising from a willful misconduct, illegal acts, or unapproved alterations to deeded easements or public utilities. She had seen the financial risk, and her professional ethics had outweighed her fear of Eleanor. The coalition was forming. I was no longer a lone man fighting for his property. I was becoming the focal point for a community correction. While I was integrating this new evidence into my file, which had now grown into a formidable stack of binders on my office floor, Eleanor was plotting her revenge. She was not the type to retreat or reconsider. Humiliation only made her more aggressive. She made her final desperate move. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. It was from a downtown law firm, the kind with a fancy, embossed letterhead. It was a formal notice of a special executive meeting of the Lakeside Meadows HOA, to be held in 1 week's time. The agenda contained a single item: a to vote on the levying of a special assessment of $5,000 against the property at 1428 Willow Creek Lane for willful destruction of association property, and to authorize the board to place a lien on said property for the costs of legal fees. Paved community walkway. She was trying to crush me. She was using the full terrifying power of the HOA to threaten me with a massive fine and a lien on my home. It was a declaration of total war. It was intended to frighten me into submission before the meeting ever took place. It was a classic bully tactic, a final, over-the-top escalation. But she had made a critical error. She had documented her intentions. This letter was not a threat, it was a confession. It was a signed, sealed admission that she intended to lead the entire community into a legal and financial minefield. It was the last receipt I needed for my collection. I placed it carefully on top of the binder, labeled A exhibits for hearing, the project was now fully scoped. All that was left was the presentation. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed, and I had never seen so many residents at an HOA meeting. The air was thick with tension and whispered speculation. Eleanor had successfully rallied her supporters, who occupied the front rows, their faces set with grim loyalty. But the rest of the room was filled with anxious, curious homeowner, the Millers, the Hendersons, and dozens of others who had suffered under Eleanor's rule in silence. They weren't there to support me, not yet. They were there to see what would happen. They were there for the spectacle. I arrived alone, 5 minutes before the scheduled start time. I wasn't carrying a briefcase full of intimidating files. I had a simple, rolling laptop bag. From it I took out a small, high-definition projector and my laptop. I set it up on a table at the side of the room, aimed at a blank white wall. Eleanor watched me, a smug, contemptuous look on her face. She thought it was a pathetic, amateurish attempt to intimidate her. She had no idea. The meeting began. Eleanor, as president, took the floor. She launched into a performance worthy of the stage. Her voice trembled with manufactured emotion as she spoke of a community spirita and the need for neighborly cooperation. She painted me as a bitter, reclusive old man who was selfishly hoarding a piece of land that rightfully belonged to everyone. She spoke of the safety of children who needed a clear path to the lake, away from the dangers of the street. She even managed to produce a few tears as she described her tireless unpaid work to maintain the beauty and value of our neighborhood. And now, she concluded, her voice rising to a crescendo, we have one individual who seeks to undo all that work, who has violently destroyed community property, and who now threatens the very fabric of our neighborhood. We cannot allow this. We must vote to approve this assessment and show that we will not be bullied. Her supporters erupted in applause. The motion was seconded. It was time to vote. Before the vote, I said, my voice cutting through the applause. I did not stand up. I spoke calmly from my seat. According to the bylaws, Article 7, Section 3, a homeowner who is the subject of a special assessment has the right to address the board for 10 minutes. Eleanor's face tightened. She had forgotten that rule. She could not deny me without blatantly violating her own procedures. 10 minutes, Arthur, she snapped. The board's time is valuable. I walked to the front of the room and turned on my projector. The first image that appeared on the wall was a crystal-clear, high-resolution scan of my property deed. The legal description was highlighted in yellow. I began, my voice steady and measured. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I live at 1428 Willow Creek Lane. This is the deed to my property. Let us start with the facts. I let the image sit there for a moment. Then I clicked to the next slide. It was the county plat map, the same one I had shown to Deputy Miller. My property was outlined in red. The drainage easement was clearly marked. This is the official county record of my property. As you can see, the area Mrs. Vance refers to as the East Lake Walkway is in fact a 20-foot drainage easement located entirely within my property lines. A low murmur went through the room. People were leaning forward looking at the map. On October 5th, I continued clicking to the next slide, which showed a still frame from my phone video of Eleanor directing the workers of the HOA under Mrs. H. Fancia's direction, trespassed and installed a gate here. Click. A picture of the gate. AI send a formal request via certified mail to have it removed. Click. An image of the 5 signed return receipts. That request was ignored. Instead, I was fined $1,000. Click. A scan of the violation notice. I was not arguing. I was not emotional. I was simply presenting the data, piece by piece. I was letting the documents speak for themselves. This is not a walkway, I said, my voice hardening slightly. It said. It is a critical piece of infrastructure, it said. Why? The next slide was a topographical map of the entire neighborhood, with water flow patterns indicated by blue arrows. My swale was a major artery. This easement is the primary overflow for the retention pond up on Hillside Drive. Its purpose is to prevent flooding on the lower streets in this development. I paused and looked directly at the people in the front row. Streets like Azalea Court and Magnolia Trace. Mrs. Bencia Street. The murmur in the room grew louder. People were turning to look at their neighbors on those streets, and now, for the most important exhibit, click. The final slide appeared on the wall. It was a scan of the original 1984 hydrological study for Lakeside Meadows. I had zoomed in on the specific section dealing with the easement, C. The note I had written 40 years ago was clearly visible. A channel must remain unpaved and unimpeded. Some of you may not know my professional background, I said, turning to face the audience. I was a civil engineer for 45 years. My specialty was water management. In 1984, as a young engineer, I was part of the team that designed the drainage system for this very neighborhood. I pointed to the signature on the bottom of the plan. That is my signature. I co-designed the system that keeps your homes from flooding. The proposal to pave this walkway is not just trespassing. It is a reckless act of engineering malpractice. It violates the county-approved plans for this development and would have catastrophic consequences during the first major storm. The room was dead silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Eleanor's face was the color of chalk. The mask had not just dropped, it had shattered. Her eyes were wide with a dawning, panicked horror. She was realizing the depth of her miscalculation. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I wasn't finished, and for the board members who are considering this vote, I said, my gaze sweeping over them, I would direct your attention to this. Click. The exclusion clause from their own insurance policy filled the screen. Your insurance will not cover you. When this illegal paving causes the homes on the lower streets to flood, they will flood at the cost of the damages, the lawsuits, the remediation will not be paid by the insurance company. It will be paid by you, by every homeowner in this association, through a massive special assessment. I have here a preliminary estimate from my old firm for the remediation of such a flood event. I held up a single piece of paper. It is just over $700,000. A collective gasp went through the room. That was the turning point. The fight was over. Sarah Jenkins, the accountant on the board, was the first to move. She stood up, her face pale but resolute. Moved to indefinitely table the motion for assessment against Mr. Pendleton, she said, her voice clear and strong. Furthermore, I move for a vote of no confidence in our president, Eleanor Vance, for willfully exposing this association to catastrophic legal and financial liability. 1. Direct opposition to expert advice. Mr. Henderson stood up. I second that motion. The room erupted. It was no longer a meeting. It was a rebellion. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, her face a blank canvas of shock. Then she turned and fled the room, pushing her way through the stunned crowd. The vote was called. The motion to table the assessment passed unanimously. The vote of no confidence passed, 4-0, with Eleanor Rath's seat empty. It was over. In the weeks that followed, the old order of Lakeside Meadows crumbled completely. The HOA's lawyer, after a frantic 24 hours of reviewing the evidence I had presented, advised the remaining board members to issue a formal, written apology to me and to immediately reimburse me for the cost of the gate removal. They did. A new emergency election was held. Sarah Jenkins was elected the new board president. Mr. Henderson was brought back as a special advisor to the Finance Committee. Their first act was to commission a full independent audit of the HOA's finances. Under Eleanor's leadership, the audit uncovered years of mismanagement and embezzlement. It turned out the community beautification of projects were often just Eleanor hiring contractors to do work on her own home and billing it to the association. The findings were turned over to the county sheriff's office. Eleanor was eventually charged with felony fraud and embezzlement. Faced with a mountain of evidence, Mr. Henderson's meticulous records were the star witnesses. Pleaded guilty. She was forced to pay over $80,000 in restitution. To do so, she had to sell her house. On Magnolia Trace, a young family with a noisy, happy dog moved in. The community began to heal. The new board, under Sarah's guidance, went through the bylaws with a fine-toothed comb. They rescinded dozens of the most ridiculous and punitive rules. The fines for garden gnomes and off-brand beige paint were struck from the books. People started planting flowers again. A sense of oppressive scrutiny lifted from the neighborhood. Neighbors who had been afraid to even make eye contact with each other started having block parties. They stopped by my house, one by one. The Millers brought a freshly baked apple pie. Mr. Henderson brought me a cutting from his prize-winning rose bush. They thanked me, not just for saving them from a potential flood, but for showing them that the bully was not invincible. I became a reluctant, quiet hero. I hadn't wanted a fight. I had just wanted to be left alone. But by defending my small piece of order, I had inadvertently restored it for everyone else. Months have passed now. It is autumn. I am sitting on my back porch, just as I was on that morning. When it all began, my coffee is warm in my hands. The flimsy fence I had erected to block the path is gone, replaced by a simple, elegant, split-rail fence that marks the property line without being aggressive. Along its base, the climbing roses Martha planted years ago, which I transplanted from another part of the yard, are beginning to establish themselves. Next spring, they will cover the wood in a cascade of color. The swale is undisturbed, covered in thick, healthy grass. We had a heavy rain last week, a real gully washer, and I came out here with a flashlight in the dark to watch it work. The water flowed through the channel exactly as designed, a swift, silent river that drained into the lake, protecting the homes downstream. It was a beautiful thing to see, a small victory for order over chaos. I have a new key on my keychain now. It sits next to the key to my front door. Itace for the gate to the new community garden, which the board established in a previously unused common area. They gave me the first plot, as a sign of respect. I am growing tomatoes and herbs, using some of the heirloom seeds Martha saved. I look at that key sometimes, and think about the nature of ownership. Eleanor thought ownership was about power and control. She believed a title gave her the right to impose her will. But she was wrong. True ownership, I have come to realize, isn't about possession, it's about stewardship. It is the quiet, daily act of tending to something, of understanding its nature, of respecting its boundaries and its purpose. Whether it is a marriage, a garden, or a simple patch of land with a drainage easement. You don't really own it. You are just its caretaker for a little while. My name is on the deed, but the land belongs to itself. My job was simply to protect it, to let it do the work it was designed to do. On paper, I won a property dispute. But in my heart, I feel like I just kept a promise I made to my wife, and to a younger version of myself who, 40 years ago, made a small note in a margin, trusting that the facts would one day matter. And they did, the peace is restored. The system is in balance. The work is done.